I thought I'd give you just a snapshot of sort of what JSONs are. They call them the JSONs, and they prefer to remain anonymous. But they've been doing reports for the U.S. government since 1960, and this is an early report. This is 1979, I guess, on the impact of atmospheric carbon dioxide on climate. So they try to be very forward-looking. They did some stuff on the Vietnam War that was not very popular, and a guy's garage got burned. So after that, they sort of, if you read the book, there's a Dr. X and a Dr. Y, so some stay anonymous. But these this is Henry, he's going to be working on us. This is sort of what the audience looks like when you go to a JSON meeting. I've seen 2 women in my entire time. There's only about 60 maximum. They are self-selective, so they always have worked with the military, principally on defense projects. They were funded almost exclusively by the military, and then the Department of Defense tried to add people to their group. They're academics, and so of course they didn't like that very much. So they broke away from the Department of Defense and created their own entity, and so now they reach out to other agencies. And so that's how they stay independent. So they're independent, a group of advisors to the U.S. government. They're academics, primarily theoretical physicists. These guys are really smart. They're National Academy members. They're Nobel Prize winners. They're meeting in April. It's because the National Academy is meeting the first few days of the week, and then they tag their annual meeting at the end of the week. But they're really interesting to talk to. As you can imagine, they're not ecologists, because what they do is they have this terrible assignment. They go to La Jolla, California for the summer, and they've been doing that every summer since 1960. They take their kids, their family, the guys predominantly, go to work during the day, the families all play together, and then they get together during the weekends. That's changed through time, so that's not quite that sort of deal, but they are there all of June and through into July. So ecologists probably are not going to do that, but they're very quantitative. They're chemists, astronomers, still a lot of theoretical physicists, oceanographers, mathematicians. So the deal is that they are accessible to the U.S. government for their advice, and they like really hard problems. So they more recently have gotten into the U.S. Census Bureau, so I think the next time we see a census, it'll look different. So they had some input into how should we actually create a census that people will respond to. They've also been working with the health department on data infrastructure. So they sort of expanded. So Dr. Witecki is our undersecretary for the mission area that we're in, and her husband is a mathematician, and so they know a JSON, like they call him. And she always wanted them to do a project for the USDA, but they could never get them interested. So they would float out a few things, and the JSONs would always say, well, no, it can't be something that the USDA can already do, because you can do that yourself. And it has to be something in our wheelhouse, which is they're working with the military, they're very quantitative, they're chemists, right? So how would we make them be interested in something that we do in the Department of Ag? So they tried sort of pollinators. No, you guys do that already. They tried a couple different things the last few years. They sort of struck out. So Dr. Witecki says, oh, let's send Deb. Right? So they send me to the JSON meeting last June, and I'm supposed to try to figure them out and then come back with an idea to get them interested in the USDA. So I went to a summer study last June, and most of their work is classified. And so I went to an unclassified, but the first hour was classified. So I didn't really know what it was about. But my part was I had to talk about the modeling that we do, and I figured out through time what they were after is they have image people to watch NCIS, right? These guys are always watching, look at imagery all the time, trying to figure out what's going on in the military, and they want to incorporate more predictive modeling. So they had people who do modeling from different kinds of parts of the agencies come in and talk about how do we use models and how do we validate them. That was the big thing. How do you know you're right? Right? So if they're going to go into this modeling deal from just looking at imagery, you got to know they're right? Because this is like really important for the military. So that was what I did. I talked about ecosystems models and how do we validate them. And it's like being at a prelim. So they constantly, what's NPP? Now what is NPP? It's not just net primary production. What actually is NPP? How do you measure it? Why do you measure it that way? They're constantly poking. Like you have a 45-minute talk and you're there an hour, and they're constantly like poking. But they're very curious, right? So they're also very curious, especially about the USDA, because they know nothing about the USDA. So that was the project I was involved with, so I sort of like knew a little bit. The room next to me, it was classified, so the table outside had all their cell phones. So you had to like drop your cell phones, all your computers, then you can go in the building, and then you go in the room. So ours was classified at the beginning, so I didn't know the context of what they were after, but then after that the talks were unclassified. So when I came back then, I was supposed to try to figure out a problem that they would be interested in doing. So here's the problem that we sort of came up with. So here's the United States. So the USDA, every month, the USDA has to put out, and we've been doing it since 1862, how much food we have, right? Of every kind of food. Strawberries to peanuts and it's food and fiber, right? So cotton, corn, everything, everywhere. So this is a huge problem, but the USDA does a really good job. But there's a lot of heterogeneity across the country. So this is an imagery product that shows crop identity, but we also need to know how much. It isn't just enough to know we've got this stuff. We need to know actually how much. And the USDA does this. Every month they sort of produce how much food do we have, and that sort of runs the economy of the country. Now we also do this for the world, for the 20 commodities that the US is interested in. So we also do that globally. But this is sort of what the National Ag Statistics Service does. Now, if we've been doing it since 1862, you can imagine that we have a lot of information, and the USDA is a big place, and there's a lot of its people, right? So the imagery actually does not play a big role in the production estimates. It's a lot of it's people-driven. Believe it or not, they call on the phone and ask a farmer, what do you think you're going to get in your yield this year? I mean, there's a lot of that still goes on. So this is, I think, we could actually do better. We do a really good job, but we could do better. So we have a lot of data, right? So the Ag Census started in 1820. We have a huge amount of information. So this is now not a range talk, right? This is a cropland talk. This is agriculture, like USDA, big in USDA. So you have all these reports, a lot of information. The first time NASS created a report was 1862, and they actually had wool. How much wool? Well, what was going on in 1862? The Civil War. We need to know how much wool there was because we need to create uniforms for the northern states, right? The country. So I mean, it's really important to know how much stuff we have. So now the NASS creates this National Ag Statistics Service. You people with the climate hubs has already been gotten into this. The quick stat stuff, you can actually get in and figure out. All this stuff is online, right? I'm not saying it's easy to get to, but it's online. We have a lot of data. All right. Well, there's also the USDA research sites. We have a lot of research data. So NASS does everything from an operational sense. We also have a lot of research data, a lot of imagery, and then of course satellite imagery. But our photo imagery starts in the 1930s, right? And then of course our much better imagery now. But they're not taking advantage of this imagery very well. So there's a lot of ground information and a lot of imagery. Well, that sounds like the military to me. You watch NCIS, they have ground information and they have imagery, right? So why can't we access what the military is doing to take and put all this stuff together and actually zoom in and zoom out and figure out what's going on like the military does? So what happened was I came back and I started asking the NASS guys. So what could we have these guys do? And one of the guys in an offside comment, he said, I have these guys that ask me all the time, why can't you use imagery to tell like a peach tree from an apricot tree? Or a diseased tree from, a tree that's not diseased, or a drought-stressed tree. Well, they can, like in Oregon, right? I mean, at a very specific place, you can do that. But think about doing that for the whole country, for all of the crops, right? This is what NASS has to do. So think about zooming into a particular area, doing a really good job, then doing that everywhere across the country. That's the problem. Well, our military does that. They zoom into Iraq, and they don't have to call the government there and say, oh, what uniforms are you guys wearing today? Right? We know that, right? So somehow they have all this information. They don't have to go to local information. So that was sort of the gist of what I sold when I came back, is this is the problem we should have the Jasons work on. So it looks... Conceptually, we know how to do this, right? We have imagery, and there's a whole bunch of stuff, right? And then we have a bunch of ground observations, And all we have to do is integrate it. It's simple. And then we analyze it, and we verify it, and then we create our estimates, and then we do trend analysis with our models. We change those estimates through time, and then we do forecasts, and then we see how close our forecasts are to our estimates, and then we sort of compare that, and then we start over again. Right? Conceptually, we know how to do this. We have no way to know how to do this in an operational sense and put it all together. But somehow I think the military does this. I think other places do this too. But this was a problem. So this is our sort of the crop strategy study is what they call it. So I don't think that we need access to imagery or algorithms. I think we've got that, right, in our research. If you actually pull all that together with the ARS, we have all that. But we don't have a system to actually put it all together. So that's what we asked the Jasons to do. Develop a strategy to seamlessly integrate across space and time in near real time, right? Remember the USDA is doing it every single month. Multiple sources and types of data products from imagery and ground-based observations and sensors, and allow new stuff to come in, right? That's all they have to do. So they like hard problems. This is a really hard problem, and they just loved it, right? So they're just like, okay, this is something we can do. We can build on the stuff that we know we've worked with the military and the Department of Defense to actually help the USDA. If they could help us do this, we could help then the USDA move forward in the future. So then it's not just production, right? You've talked to them about the Grand Challenge, I think, that we can't just produce a lot of food without worrying about environmental consequences, right? So if we just produce a whole lot of stuff and not worry about, we need to worry also about trash in the earth, right? So we need to improve estimates of production, but we also need to worry about what are we doing to the environment. And so in our mission area, which I didn't really pay much attention to before I went to the USDA, but there is another big agency besides ARS and NAS we've talked about, is ERS, which is an Economic Research Service. And so one of the things I try to do in the office is make sure that everybody plays. And so I still had this other big agency that wasn't on the table. So it's sort of expensive to get the Jasons. And so to get everybody to buy in, I needed to get the ERS to the table too. And so they're really interested in the greenhouse gas flux and actually getting all the pieces together in human behavior and how management influences sort of the consequences of food production. So once I got this piece, now ERS is at the table too. Now they're saying, okay, now we really like this Jason project too. Okay, and then of course, I had to have a little bit of what I like to do. So it's not just one spot, right, but how are these sort of fields connected? So now I've layered on another layer of complexity, which is, how, when, and where are these fields connected, right? So I don't want to just do ag stuff, but I like to think about that we actually have ag and range and all this kind of stuff. So I don't know if they're going to get there, but it's interesting to me to think about how are all these fields connected? Are there insects coming in? Or how are the floods? Or drought, all this kind of stuff. And then can we bring these all together? That's the climate hub sort of stuff. And at a continental scale, right, how are these things sort of connected? So those are sort of the major pieces, and the Jasons are sort of thinking about that and how they can help us.